Hey everyone, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
We are diving deep today into the story of, well, a generation, the one that was promised global victory, unending economic boom,
Mm-hmm.
only to have their adulthood defined by, historic debt and systemic setbacks.
That's a powerful way to frame it, yeah. We're focused on the millennial generation, those born roughly between 1981 and 1996.
Right.
They are a cohort that grew up with these impossibly high expectations. Remember being called the net generation or the heirs of the end of history.
Oh, absolutely.
And then they just faced this historical series of economic and cultural traumas that completely upended the narrative.
Exactly. And helping us unpack this whole generational saga is a rigorous new book. It's called What Happened to Millennials, written by the award-winning financial reporter Charlie Wells, just published in 2025 by Abrams Press. There's a link in the description if you want to check it out.
Yeah, and the book really serves as a necessary defense, I think. It documents the world events, the cultural shifts that shaped this cohort, systematically moving past those tired, awful cliches we all hear. You know the ones.
The avocado toast.
Wow.
Yeah, what immediately hooked me was that commitment to the defense. Wells acknowledges the popular caricatures, the avocado toast, the idea that Zillow is just porn for them.
Right, those lazy takes.
But he doesn't just dismiss them. He uses hard data, real narratives, to argue that those are actually symptoms of deeper systemic problems.
That's key.
And this structure, moving from a personal anecdote right into national economic policy, it's fantastic, really compelling.
And what's fascinating here, too, is that Wells himself is an active millennial journalist. He's written for Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, The Economist.
So he has that inside perspective.
Exactly. That immediate proximity and sort of insider view lend real authority to his argument about the world they actually inherited.
So let's establish that inheritance, because if we look back at the intellectual and historical context, the late 1990s were marked by just unbelievable optimism, weren't they?
Oh, completely. You had the post-Cold War victory glow. Francis Fukuyama's end of history idea was everywhere. And an economic boom with like 4% annual growth. It generated 18 million new jobs. It really looked like perpetual success was here.
Culturally, too, it felt like the apex of maybe innocence before the big shift.
Yeah, Wells points to figures like Britney Spears, born right at the dawn of the era, turns 18 in 1999. She kind of symbolized that time of high stakes, high polish, high expectations.
The ultimate pop star for the moment.
Right, and they were the net generation, using early internet tools like AIM, chatting away.
Oh, AIM. Yeah.
Mostly unaware, I think, that the foundation beneath them was already cracking.
And those cracks appeared pretty quickly.
Wow.
Wells details how policymakers were actually worried the market was growing too fast.
Right, foreshadowing the dot-com crash.
Which the economists later called the biggest and fastest rise and fall in business history. That's quite a statement.
It really was. And that period wasn't just about the market bubble popping. Even things like the Battle of Seattle protests in 99.
Organized using these new internet tools showed this kind of networked global movement starting to seek accountability. It really stunned the mainstream.
Okay, so this brings us to the core thesis of the book. He calls it the J-curve of disappointment. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. The idea is that millennials began life on the optimistic upswing of the J, built on all this promise.
Right, the upward curve.
But then adult life quickly plunged them into the steep downturn of the J, defined by these harsh economic realities that just weren't part of the original plan.
And he backs this J-curve idea up with some truly sobering numbers. Hard data highlighting the systemic impact.
Yeah, the stats are pretty stark.
I was stunned by the facts about mental health and community. Nearly 1 in 3 millennials report having 0 best friends. 0.
Wow.
And they report higher loneliness rates than boomers or Gen Xers.
And that loneliness isn't isolated, is it? It connects directly back to the economic pressure.
Exactly.
They carry the highest rates of student debt, took way longer to achieve home ownership, and bought houses at higher prices, too.
Right, bought at higher prices, yeah. And crucially, think about when they entered the job market. Right smack into the Great Recession.
A historic bust.
A historic bust where 1 in 5 young people was unemployed. That permanently suppressed their starting salaries, their future earning potential.
Yeah.
It's a huge hit.
Wait, I just want to pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
Because the data linking this generational mental health crisis, the loneliness you mentioned, the higher suicide rates reported, linking that directly to the failure of the economic system, to provide stable job entry, affordable housing. That's a really powerful synthesis he's making.
It is.
It suggests that economic failure didn't just hurt wallets, it actually led to a collapse of community support, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the book's genius, I think, is in showing how these big abstract numbers translate into individual lives.
Oh, yeah.
Wells used these personal narratives almost like data points themselves to document the systemic failures.
Okay, let's look at a few of those stories then. Wells introduces us to Olivia. Her early life was just completely defined by the collective trauma of 9/11.
Yeah, a deeply personal connection. Her father died at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 103rd floor of the World Trade Center.
Unimaginable.
And the book argues that for her, adulthood had hit before puberty arrived. That's a direct quote.
Wow.
And this premature loss made what psychologists call differentiation, that necessary process of emotionally and mentally breaking away from your childhood identity or parents.
Becoming your own person.
Exactly. It made that incredibly difficult for her. And this inability to separate, he argues, manifested years later in her struggle with relationship ambiguity. Things like constantly avoiding those define the relationship talks, the DTRs.
That makes the psychological jargon suddenly feel very real, very relatable.
Doesn't it?
Okay, then we also meet Aaron from Alliance, Ohio. His story illustrates the end of that old idea, the job for life.
Right. His father lost a 25-year job at American Steel Foundries during the 2001-2003 recession. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was part of a much larger capital shift.
Wells labels this period the age of chaos. Wait, can you quickly define that age of chaos for us?
Yeah.
What exactly is the mechanism he's describing there?
Sure. The age of chaos, as Wells puts it, refers to capital's new priority, this rapid, unrestrained hunt for short-term profits, often at the expense of long-term stability, employee retention.
Loyalty.
Loyalty, yeah. It's basically the replacement of the old company man ideal with the constantly adapting, maybe unrooted employee, always chasing the next thing because there's no security.
And the human cost of that shift, as shown in Aaron's life, is just devastating. Aaron's own limited job prospects working at Burger Hut, Arby's, then a skid factory.
Yeah, just scraping by.
It created that atmosphere of isolation, didn't it? Which led directly into the opioid crisis in his community. He details something called The Circle, sharing Trick 30s.
For $60 a pill, it's harrowing.
And Wells underlines this by noting that overdoses have now killed more Americans since the millennium began than all the wars fought in that same period combined.
That statistic is just staggering. It really stops you in your tracks.
It does. Then there's a third story, Justin's. It illustrates the intense economic pressure, particularly on men who didn't pursue college.
Right. Wells notes that wages for non-college educated men have actually declined 14% since 1979, adjusted for inflation.
14% decline. That creates incredible strain. In Justin's case, his wife, Tara, consistently made more money.
Which flips the traditional script, adding another layer of complexity.
And this just highlights the absurdity of trying to achieve that so-called ownership society that the Bush administration pushed so hard for.
Which, as Wells points out, was often a political strategy, right? Rooted in Margaret Thatcher's idea to create this voting bloc of property owners who'd oppose wealth redistribution.
Yeah. So Justin and Tara, they had to move cross-country to Charlotte, finally managed to buy a house for $178,000 in 2018.
Which probably felt like a huge victory.
A huge victory, only for Justin to realize he basically had to become a stay-at-home dad. Why? Because the cost of childcare in North Carolina actually exceeded college tuition there.
Incredible. The system just wasn't set up to deliver the prosperity that had been promised to them, even if they played by all the supposed rules.
It really shows the disconnect. Okay, now let's pivot a bit from the personal costs to the public discourse landscape they inherited.
Right, the media environment.
Well, it transitions beautifully here, I thought, by using the infamous Jon Stewart appearance on CNN's Crossfire back in 2004.
Oh, I remember that vividly.
He uses that's an early indicator of the information haze, as he calls it, that kind of preceded the full-blown social media era.
Stewart's critique then, remember, was so prescient, he slammed CNN, basically, for helping the politicians and the corporations.
His words were, hurting America.
Right, by letting them just spew spin unchecked. And that segment went viral online almost instantly, didn't it?
It really did.
It showed the audience was hungry for genuine critique, even as the traditional media structure was arguably failing them.
Which leads to this critical question the book raises. Why did the country fail to address these deeper systemic issues, especially after a massive collective trauma like 9/11.
Yeah, that's a central puzzle.
And the mind-blowing fact here, or at least one of them, is that following 9/11, the immediate rush was for what Wells calls a magical resolution through revenge.
The War on Terror, the Patriot Act.
Exactly. And because of that rush, the U.S. never really addressed the deeper structural questions about trust, about policy, about what went wrong.
And you see the cost of that failure so clearly in the statistics that Wells presents. Public trust in government absolutely skyrocketed right after 9/11, up to 66%, I think.
Yeah, huge surge.
But because those deeper questions were never really answered, never grappled with, that trust just plummeted down to just 24% by 2007.
24%. That collapse of faith in institutions. It must have profoundly affected millennials' outlook on everything.
How could it not? And he also directly tackles that persistent millennial cringe narrative.
Oh yeah, the stereotypes.
Specifically, the whole participation trophy argument. This is maybe my favorite part of the critical analysis in the book.
Mine too. Because Wells has this really sharp two-part rebuttal. First, he argues that empty praise from the self-esteem movement back in their childhood, it was often meaningless to them.
Right. They weren't dumb.
They actually sought out and preferred honest, critical feedback. He gives examples like Miju's experience giving blunt feedback in Silicon Valley later on.
Yeah, they wanted real input. And the second part of the rebuttal is crucial. Their struggle with failure didn't actually come from being spoiled or coddled.
Not from participation trophies.
No, it came from being told relentlessly that they had to cast themselves as the lead characters in their own careers. Remember books like The Startup of You?
Oh, definitely. That whole ethos.
So when massive systemic failures like the Great Recession hit, this generation internalized it. They interpreted it as a catastrophic personal flaw, not a failure of the larger economic machine.
That completely reframes the entire debate, doesn't it? It wasn't entitlement. It was misplaced responsibility almost.
Precisely. Which leads logically into the legacy of the generation, which, as Wells emphasizes, is still being written. They're still figuring things out.
Right.
And he explores how millennials are adapting to the failures of the previous system, especially in areas like relationships and community building.
We see that through figures like Miju again, the queer millennial, who used the early internet for self-discovery despite a very conservative upbringing, and who eventually embraced non-traditional living structures, things like public non-monogamy, building really intentional, chosen family groups.
And importantly, Wells frames these not necessarily as like luxury lifestyle choices. They're often adaptive strategies, born out of the need to solve that endemic loneliness we talked about and to manage the financial strain when traditional family structures or institutions fail them.
So given that they're still rewriting their story, as he puts it, Wells leaves us, the readers, with some really provocative questions to chew on.
Yeah, things to think about.
Like, what does this reliance on chosen family and non-traditional living arrangements suggest about maybe the next generation's solutions to loneliness and financial stress? Is this the new model?
That's a big one. And also, what does it mean that this generation is, in a way, still coming out for the rest of their lives?
What do you mean by coming out?
Well, whether they're Olivia having to constantly explain what 9/11 did to her path to adulthood, or Miju constantly re-explaining her relationship structure to people.
Gotcha.
They're perpetually resisting being trapped by past stories, by old labels. They have to keep explaining their reality because it doesn't fit the old mold.
Ultimately, then, the millennial story, as presented by Wells, is really one of reconciling this incredibly optimistic start
Sky-high hopes.
with what turned out to be a profoundly challenging journey. A clusterfuck of a journey, to borrow a phrase I think Wells might appreciate.
Probably. Leaving them as the generation that is now increasingly the only adults in the room, dealing with the consequences of all that inherited chaos.
It's a really powerful, comprehensive argument he builds. It uses every available detail, the data, the stories, the history, to remind you that these broad generational generalities always fail when you look closely at history and policy.
Absolutely. So for anyone looking for a rigorous, data-backed defense of this generation or just a deeper understanding, this book is absolutely worth reading. The analysis is sharp and the details are fascinating.
Definitely pick it up. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed this analysis, please do like and subscribe. It really helps us out. And we genuinely want to hear from you. What specific fact or story about the millennial experience? Maybe the loneliness data, the age of chaos, that collapse of trust? What stood out most to you?
Yeah, let us know.
Share your insights in the comments below, and please share this with anyone who needs a shortcut to being well-informed on this topic. We'll catch you next time.